Hey, what's up, stream? My name is Jonathan Weinberger. I am the Authorized Unity Instructor for the Ultimate Guide to Game Development with Unity, and today I am with Alex Fry, the Senior Game Designer for RuneScape. And I should say former because he has recently left RuneScape to work for Splash Damage as a Senior Monetization Designer. And I'm sure you've heard of the games they've contributed to, such as Dirty Bomb, Brink, and Wolfenstein. So, Alex, I appreciate you taking the time to do this show with me, so thank you for coming on.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Happy to help.
So, we have a lot of RuneScape fans interested in this stream. So, you're kind of like... I'd say you're kind of like a legend to a lot of people. I myself was a RuneScape player from 2002 to 2006, and I feel like RuneScape probably touched everyone's childhood. So being able to have you on the show is a true like honor, and it looks like based off of your contribution to RuneScape, you've really shaped this game. So we have 60 minutes here. It's going to go by really quick. There's a lot of questions and not enough time. So what I want to do is I kind of want to just dive in here. So we want to focus mainly on RuneScape, but I also want to acknowledge what you do for Splash Damage. So why don't you tell us what you currently do at Splash Damage?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously I'm a little more limited in what I can talk about that I'm doing now for release later. But in general, Splash Damage needed a dedicated monetization designer for Dirty Bomb, for the free-to-play team-based FPS game that's their own IP. And they reached out to me via an agency. I saw that they were in my old hometown of Bromley. I thought I'd give it a go. So, came down for interview and got the role.
Very cool.
So yeah, my job with them is essentially try to persuade people to part with their money without causing Star Wars Battlefront 2 levels of negative sentiment, shall we say.
Nice. So what exactly so compared like game design wise to monetization design, how are those roles different?
I'd hope that there's always going to be some overlap. I certainly would have difficulty trusting a monetization designer myself who hadn't already been a game designer, didn't know about what makes games tick.
Right.
But there's less of the sort of prototyping of actual in-game mechanics. There's less building the core of the game and more of the economic side of it, more of the progression systems, more of the cosmetics and all that sort of thing.
Right.
It's a shift in focus.
Okay. Very cool. And how long have you been with Splash Games now? Or Splash Damage?
2 months and a week.
Okay, very cool. And so you started them as soon as you left RuneScape back in October, right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. All right, so tell us, how long have you been developing for RuneScape? How long did you develop for RuneScape?
I was at Jagex for 8 years in total. 5 years as senior game designer and 3 years as content developer.
Okay, nice. So as a content developer, what was your role on RuneScape?
So this was back in the day, and it's slightly different now, not entirely different, but a content developer, when I was a content developer, was expected to be able to design at least a little bit, and to write script, essentially gameplay programming as far as that goes, and to talk to our artists about what assets would be needed to go in alongside that script and to fulfill that design. Also to do enough of the project management side of things to reasonably accurately estimate how long it would take to get any given task done, get any given set of tasks done.
Right.
So, quite a RuneScape content developer is sort of supposed to be capable of being a one-man army as far as writing an update is concerned.
Right.
And then tie in from that to the artists and to the QA team and to community management and all that.
Okay, cool. So you were content developer for 3 years, which means you were a programmer, and you used RuneScape's proprietary engine, right, which is like a scripting language?
Yeah, RuneTech is the engine.
RuneTech, okay, and it runs off of RuneScript, right?
And RuneScript is then the content scripting language that runs over the top of it. Yeah.
Very cool. So how did you go from a programmer to a game designer?
Well, as I say, if you're a content developer in RuneScape, you're expected to be able to design to perhaps a greater degree than the job description would entail if you were a gameplay programmer elsewhere.
Right.
So we generally expect our content developers, certainly for smaller updates, to handle the design of it themselves and then pass it on for design review with a dedicated design role.
Right.
Bigger projects that are core to the progression of the game, or that have a lot of fingers and a lot of pies across the game, like a new skill, you'd expect a designer to design that and then discuss it with obviously the player base, but also the content developers that are going to be implementing it.
Right. Okay, so as a game designer, being a senior level game designer for RuneScape, how much of your content role actually stuck with you though? Did you still do any code, or were you actually just a pure game design guy?
In theory, none of my job description required writing any code when I was a designer.
Interesting.
In practice, there are some things, particularly things I'd written as a content developer, that, well, I knew the code. So if it needed changes made, then it made sense for me to just jump in and make whatever fixes were needed.
Right.
And I'm finding that's quite prevalent in the industry as a whole, particularly that the people who have that organizational knowledge, that organizational memory, because they've been at a company for a while and know the game, know the product, know the way the players think, are generally the best to just jump in and fix things. One of the people I work most closely with now at Splash Damage is the analyst, but he wasn't always a dedicated analyst. He used to be sort of go-to analyst, producer, coder, designer, all these sort of things, and it sticks. You don't sort of move away from that entirely, because it makes sense to use that expertise.
I gotcha. So a really interesting question that came in from the Discord, which is our community chat. What's the point in a company using like RuneScript or a Neverwinter script or anything like that where it's just like a benefit? Like, what's the benefit of layering a custom script over your engine?
For the most definitive answer, you'd have to go and ask Andrew Gower that. But as I understand it, when RuneScape was getting off the ground, when it was moving into sort of more than just 3 people making a game in the Gower's kitchen.
Right.
They were hiring people mostly for creativity and passion, rather than skill in software engineering. And as such, they needed a very customizable programming language that could be made, at least initially, quite simple, quite straightforward, very easy to learn.
Right.
And some of the legacy of that causes, well, I won't say problems, but causes quirks in what can be developed or what can be easily developed these days.
Right.
There's little sort of strange facets of the engine still, whereby any given integer array can't persist outside the code block that you generate it in and call it in, because there are only 4 arrays available to any given server.
I gotcha.
Therefore, you've got to stop using it so that someone else can have it for a bit. So little legacy quirks like that are just a result of this thing being built up over time, rather than designed from scratch for purpose by someone whose speciality is in software engineering.
Right. Okay, that makes sense, right? Hire creative people, and then you need a creative way to get. You need a user-friendly way for creative people to program. It makes total sense. So Your time at RuneScape is spanning over 8 years. Your wiki, which is in the description, you're known as Mod Motor around the entire
Multi.
RuneScape world. What can you tell us about specifically what have you specifically contributed to the design of RuneScape?
Uh, well, it's sort of bits and pieces, really. They mount up over the course of 8 years. I rewrote the tutorial at least 3 times.
Tutorial
Uh,
Island?
Not Tutorial Island, I'm afraid. No, that everyone's favorite tutorial was written a long, long time ago.
Oh.
Um, but there was a tutorial in Lumbridge that featured essentially a breadcrumb trail of tasks of in-game achievements to complete that would lead you from place to place and teach you the controls in the meantime.
Right.
There was a tutorial with a dragon in a cellar that the legendary Mod Ash had made, which I retrofitted to voiced content when we decided for a very brief period of time that we were going to try to voice all content in the game, which was very ambitious for a game with, well, almost certainly millions of words in it.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. So that's like totally new. So back when I was playing RuneScape between 2002 2006, there was no dialogue that was voiced. I feel like that didn't come till after. That must have not. I don't think that came into the game till what 2011, 2012 maybe.
Well, I think until RS3. I think
Okay.
until the launch of the third version of the client, or maybe just slightly before, we
Okay,
didn't have
right.
tech to actually play voice samples. We had to add that specifically.
Very cool. And so, for those who don't know, Alex actually contributed to the voice acting, which later in the stream we're going to actually play something that if you're on Halloween, if you're walking around RuneScape, you will hear his soundtrack that he recorded that's in the game for the rest of life. So it's pretty awesome. All right, so there's some great developer questions here. How is developing an MMO different than developing a traditional game?
Uh, I take it you mean sort of as opposed to a box product. So
Yeah, yeah.
that's
Let's say a box product that's maybe has some DLC expansion, and then kind of just kind of dies after 3-4 years.
yeah,
RuneScape, on the other hand, you guys have been growing for 20 years.
yeah. So it's games as a service, right? It's the expectation of constant releases and constant content and
Right.
constant bug fixes, whereas a traditional, I'll say box product because even if it's on Steam, it's still a box product. But uh, with those, you have milestones for your publisher, and you need to hit those. And when they're all done, the game is ready, in theory,
Right.
and you go gold, and it goes up on Steam, and you sell it to people. With games as a service, you have to keep evolving and keeping people interested and keeping the fixes coming for the things that the last content release inevitably broke, because you're layering content on content that might have really squirrely or spaghetti code going back hundreds and hundreds of man hours of work. So it means that the cadence of it is smaller releases far more often. It means that any given release has to be being worked on by no more
Right.
than a portion of your team at any given time, because the next one's got to be in development while this one's in QA, and the one that's following on from that one has to be in design, so it's ready to go to production when the one that's currently in production goes to QA.
Right. Right.
So there's challenges of the actual production process. As far as design is concerned, like specifically making sure that the design work is done appropriately in time, I don't know that there's a massive difference. You still have to have a design, the bare bones of a design ready that you can then talk to people about, that you can make sure is on the right track, that you then flesh out, that you talk to the balancer about if you've got a separate balancer.
Right, right.
That so that the design itself is well rounded by the time it comes to being developed, and you've then got to be open to the realities that once something starts being developed, there may be something that means the design has to change in practical terms, and so you've got to be ready to adjust and tweak while not changing the asset requirements too much, and not changing the software engineering requirements too much, because that will throw all of the production side of things off again.
I gotcha.
In terms of designing the game that people want to play, perhaps it's slightly the granular nature of those releases means that you've got more opportunity to talk to the community about what went well and what didn't go well between the last release and the next release. If you released, if you released, let's say, the invention skill, and it hadn't had time to be fully baked, and it came out horribly imbalanced and needed copious fixes within the first couple of days, then maybe you might make sure that the next time, when you're wanting to design a mining and smithing update, for example, you are very careful to give it the time that it absolutely needs.
Right. So with so in a traditional game setting, right? Think Call of Duty, think any Xbox game, any platformer. Think like the new popular game called Cuphead that just came out this year. Those games are created by higher ups, and they have design teams, and they say, here's the game we're making. They listen to very little from the community. In an MMO such as RuneScape, how much does community engagement shape the game?
I think RuneScape's sort of justifiably proud about the amount of community engagement we get. We've got people on our subreddit, we've got people in the various discords that players form. There's JMods in as many of those as I can identify. Sorry, JMods, Jagex moderators, staff members. We've pretty much everyone who works in development on RuneScape has a Twitter account, which people contact them through. Right. There's polls in game. For a while, we had this thing called Power to the Players, but it had its upsides. But honestly, there's so much fluff in a system where you ask people to give you ideas. Sturgeon's Law meant that quite a lot of them weren't really very usable.
Okay, good deal. So you guys kind of you take them in, and then you kind of assess if they're actual, like, if they're reasonable ideas or if they're something that can work. So say you guys release content. How do you handle feedback from the community if you release content that they aren't happy with, such as like a graphics update or removing combat or anything like that?
Well, if say you did put out a large change to the way the combat system worked in an attempt to make sure that a very stagnant system that wasn't really going anywhere had more room to grow, and people didn't like it. One of the benefits of having that granular release cycle is that you can tweak and you can change and you can add in new facets to that design and to that implementation that address the problems that people experience. I mean, one of the things that in hindsight was seriously wrong with EOC is that it didn't gel very well with the average player's play style in RuneScape. Most people do not play RuneScape as a lean forward game, that sort of high adrenaline approach. And so a little while into the release, we added a system called Revolution to it, which allowed you to essentially set up a series of abilities on your combat bar that the game would then run through, and it took the focus back to a more lean back style of gameplay that fits better with how most RuneScape players choose to play, while still giving players that like to go and boss, which requires a bit more direct control over using your abilities properly and in the correct time and in the correct place. It still gives them that control.
Okay. All right. So I guess it does help. That's part of the benefit of not having just a box model and having to be like, oh, they hate it, let's create a DLC and release it and have a million bugs. We have we're actively developing these things, and we can push out updates whenever we want. How many people contribute to a game the size of RuneScape?
I think the team is 150 people at the moment,
Oh,
or thereabouts.
that's
Um,
actually like looking at the size of RuneScape and the large scale game. That's actually a really small studio in comparison
it's
to like Blizzard.
well, in comparison with, yeah, sure, Blizzard is enormous, um, but that's between RuneScape 3's development, OSRS's development,
Right.
the support teams for both, the community management teams for both, and sort of all of the back end stuff, the web team, the engine team, all of that. But between all of those different groups of people, it's about 150, I think.
Okay. So what I want to do is so as a senior game designer, you're in charge of designing content, designing mini games, designing skills, perhaps, designing. When you're designing a mini game. So for instance, tell me your favorite mini game that you've designed for RuneScape.
I've got a soft spot for Cabbage Face Punch Bonanza.
Okay, so the mini game is called Cabbage Face Punch Bonanza, and the overall gist of it is that you go around and you punch monkeys in the face. Is that right?
Well, yes, there are monkeys that you punch in the face.
That's
There
all.
are
I'm gonna go
uh,
ahead and play a demo while you explain what this mini game is.
there are cabbage rocks that you mine. It's that sort of RuneScape brand of ridiculous. Partly it sprang from the fact that Mod Mark had always wanted that playground game of British Bulldog. He'd always wanted that in RuneScape, and that was sort of part of the brief. But it was originally part of a limited time event where there were three factions all playing the game, picking up points and contributing to a scoreboard. And you could buy special abilities to use, passive abilities, and all that sort of thing. And if you got knocked out, you turned into a gorilla and you did some more of the face punching to the players that were remaining. And, it's all very British Bulldog. And it's ridiculous, but I thought it was pretty good fun. And obviously there were some players that were only interested in rewards, and so they were boosting it, which was a bit of a lesson to me. If you give people a fun way to play a mini game and a not fun way to play a mini game that gives them 10% better rewards, they will deny themselves fun because they want the 10% better rewards.
Right. So you got to figure out how to balance out, and yeah, no, I totally understand that. So what goes into making a minigame like this? Like, what is the process for making a minigame? How did you pitch this to Jagex and say, here's my idea, and now let's go ahead and make this? Because there's several parts to this. Like, this is the finished product of the minigame, but I imagine there has to be planning, there has to be concept art created, there's a marketing budget for this to get it out to the community. There's audio that's designed, there's rewards designed. I mean, it's essentially an entire game within a game. Like, how much work is involved in creating this, and what is the process?
Well, most releases of this size are about 3 months end to end. From the point where someone says we need to do an Easter event, and it's going to last for X number of weeks. It's going to be a mini game that you can get some rewards from, and we want it to be a more light-hearted version of the sort of competition that the previous two world events had featured. From a design perspective, the first thing that goes on is a hell of a lot of paper prototyping, of drawing up what sort of thing it might look like, of listing off the mechanics and the content that it might involve and how they all tie together. At the moment, what I tend to use most of all is Microsoft Visio for flowcharts of how all these systems run into each other, and Balsamic to mock up what the various interfaces will look like, and then good old squared paper for drawing up that arena, and Confluence, which is our the wiki system that Atlassian, I think, makes, that Jagex uses for its internal wiki. To
Okay, yeah, cool. It's Confluence is probably what you're talking about. Confluence.
Confluence is Atlassian's wiki software, and that's the internal wiki for listing off all of those mechanics, how they work together. Here's the flowchart of how it all runs. Here's mock-ups of this, that, and the other interface for when you're finding a game, when you're in a game, when you're buying rewards that you've earned. And you take that to whoever's got sign-off on it, and that's, at that point, it was the VP and the producer. So Mod Pips and I think Mod C3DPO had sign off on that, and you say, here's what we've got. Here's how it fits the brief. Here's how it fits the goals, the user stories that it needed to meet in order to be an acceptable update for what we have planned for this chunk. And here's what I'd like to do. In my case, I generally like to give a little hint of here's how much I think it might cost, although obviously that's the final say on that is down to the content developers and the artists and the producer working together to decide that. But it's good to be able to give a ballpark figure.
Right. So yeah, I mean, it sounds like a lot of work, and that's not the only one you've done. I mean, you've done things like, what is it, the port game in RuneScape?
Ports. Ports was quite big.
I mean, that's that looks like a mini game that just requires, like, that would only work on a scale of an MMO. That mini game, is that right?
Well, so it's a mini game in name only, really, because it's got more in common with some of the old Facebook duty officer, Star Trek Online's duty officer missions, some of the Facebook casual games, and all that, just as its own thing within RuneScape. And so that had Mod Edam as a designer, and myself as designer and content developer, and Mod Raven as another content developer on it. So three people doing the design and building the systems for it. Because it was a large project. Took up a lot of art time as well. Not quite as much as Citadel's, but Citadel's was it was too big for what it did.
Right. No, it makes sense. So here's going to be something that's a super popular topic. So in game development, if you're new to game development, or if you're interested in getting into game development, it usually starts because you played a game like RuneScape and you have the idea that you want to make your own RuneScape. So we all work in an engine called Unity, which is basically a free game engine that allows you to create games. And you're going to see a promo for it later in the show. But I wanted to talk about the expectations of developing an MMO. What could you tell, like, what would you say to someone who wants to learn how to make a game and they want to start by creating an MMO that is inspired off of RuneScape? Can I just, a few hours and flop out RuneScape?
It took the Gowers a number of years to get RuneScape into a releasable state. And that was back when game software in general was a lot more simple. I'm not saying it couldn't be done. A lot of game developers these days have produced incredible stuff on their own or in very small groups, but I'd caution against trying to make an MMO as a first project.
A little too ambitious.
The trouble with an MMO isn't so much that the systems are hugely complicated, although they can be, and it's not so much that you need a ridiculous amount of content in it, although you do if you want to keep players around for any length of time. The problem with an MMO is scaling the delivery of it, is scaling the service behind it, is how many servers do you need at any given time, If you're going to be successful, you need enough people that you're going to need enough servers that you're going to need someone to provide them for you. So, like I say, I'm certainly not going to say it can't be done. When I was at school, I was working on a sort of a homebrew mud with a friend of mine, and that was, it was a multiplayer system, persistent world, multiple logins at the same time. It fit all of the requirements for an MMO, but if you wanted to make it and release it as a commercial concern, you'd most likely not get very far on just the back of that.
Right. So, and what I want to kind of do here, guys, is so for anyone interested in game development, RuneScape did not happen overnight. And what I want to do is I actually want to show you guys kind of the evolution of RuneScape. And the evolution of RuneScape starts back in like 1998 with something called Devious Mud, which was just a dungeon crawler that the two brothers created, which later became RuneScape Classic. And this is basically day one of RuneScape. So you have Devious Mud in 1998, and there's like basic combat. Maybe you can maybe like one or two skills, but ultimately they started off with a simple grid, a few concepts, and then they expanded from there. And that's the whole point of scaling an MMO from a content side. If you try to turn out RuneScape today, they are 20 years ahead of you, and they will continue to be 20 years ahead of you. And everything you're seeing here on the stream right now is the evolution of them from Devious Mud to what became RuneScape Classic to RuneScape 2, HD, all the way to where we are today. Are we on RuneScape 3 right now?
RuneScape 3, yeah.
Yeah,
and of course old school RuneScape as well,
right.
the sister product that's based on a 2007 build, although it's evolved from there under its own dedicated section of that 150-man team.
Right. And out of, and over the years, I mean, if you had to guess today, how many hours of content are in RuneScape today?
I wouldn't like to guess. I think someone did work out sort of an average. It depends in part. Some things have an RNG component to completing. Like there's bits of getting your comp cape that require you to get drops from certain things. Certainly trim comp. So you might get lucky and do it in merely 10,000 hours. You might be unlucky and take 20,000 hours. But honestly, I couldn't give you a figure, except it is in the many thousands of hours.
Right. So if anyone's interested in starting an MMO, my advice would be start with one small little square grid and give yourself a tree that you can mine and grow it from there. Because the amount of content that you would have to create, not to mention the networking infrastructure that is in place with RuneScape, and like Alex mentioned, the ability to scale a platform like that, it's very expensive and it requires a lot of time, several iterations, and ultimately creating an MMO, it's a fantasy. And RuneScape, there's a reason why when it comes to MMOs, you think RuneScape and you think World of Warcraft. No one else, I don't believe, can compete. I mean, have you experienced any MMOs that can compete on the grand scale of RuneScape?
Well, RuneScape's not without competitors. And it's not without competitors that have a huge quantity of content behind them. I don't think any of them have as much content as RuneScape. Some of them have as many hours you can put in, perhaps. And certainly World of Warcraft, if you want to collect every pet, collect every transmog appearance, go back and kill every raid boss that you didn't. If you missed any back in the day, that's going to take the hours. But World of Warcraft's time requirement is largely systemic. It's largely here is the battle pet system, you can go and complete that. Whereas RuneScape's got all of these hours of story that are separate from its skilling, that is separate from its minigames, that is separate. And that's not to diss on Warcraft. I mean, I've got a WoW account. I've got how many hours invested in that. It's a good game.
Right.
And Warcraft is probably the closest to it. Elder Scrolls Online has a lot of very rich story content, not so much in the way of minigames. Trove has got a massive quantity of time you could put into collecting all of the cosmetic appearances. You could put in an incredible amount of time and effort into the club world system that they've got. But they don't have so much in the way of the top-end bossing that RuneScape has. So that breadth of options, I think, is something very strong that RuneScape's got going for it. Both
that makes sense.
In terms of OSRS and RS3.
Right. So, as a RuneScape developer, did you play RuneScape?
Yes.
Heavily?
I would look very suspiciously on anyone that wanted to be a developer or a designer for a game they weren't willing to play. Like, perhaps not hardcore no-lifing, but certainly I would expect people to be playing it on a regular basis. I'd expect people to put at least some lunch breaks into it if they could, at least some home time into it if they could.
That's awesome.
I think if you're trying to develop for or design a game that you don't know what's in the game already because you haven't played it, that's very worrying to me.
Right. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. You should play the game. You should enjoy the game because you're going to be developing its future. What was your favorite skill?
When we got it fixed, invention was pretty good. That's sort of immodest because
I know nothing about
I designed invention and then I designed the fixes for when it had to be released 3 months early. Excuse me, kitten, go off my keyboard. Sorry, that's throwing me.
No,
apart from that, I'd certainly say fishing.
So I got a question here. Oh, go ahead.
It's not the most complex skill in the game, but it's got a social component to it where you're there fishing, everyone else is there fishing, and it's basically just it's a chat room where you're all doing some stuff, and that's part of what RuneScape was built for originally.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. All right, so I got a couple questions here. I want to take a question. One question came through YouTube from, I believe it was Charles. How would you recommend a person... So now, this goes to education. So Charles said, how would you recommend a person with a degree in game and simulation programming get their foot in the door? What is your education background? Did you need an education or a degree to get to where you are today?
I suspect my degree, if I didn't have it, I could have still got to where I am, but it would have taken longer. My degree helped me get that first content developer role because at the time RuneScape was looking for content developers who had more of a software engineering background, and my education in computer science was helpful for that.
Right.
But RuneScape hired people, particularly back in the day, on the basis of their willingness to learn, and as long as you had at least the ability to use the scripting language and to do so creatively and not making the same mistake twice and not letting that mistake get through to live, then you can learn and you can improve and you can progress.
Right.
Quite a lot of people that I know who are content developers now started in QA, one or two in community management as well, because it's a bit of a cliche, but if you are working on that game, and if you're working on elements of that game that are being produced and released, then you can get yourself close enough to it to learn how it is being made. If you're willing to put in the effort, then you can learn the necessary coding skills, take on individual projects, and essentially get noticed.
That's awesome.
I probably wouldn't recommend it as the best route. I would say that going down the route of getting a relevant education is going to save a lot of uncertainty. because if you go through that QA route, then there's no guarantee that it'll lead you in the direction that you want. And QA roles are traditionally not paid as well. So you might find yourself stuck on a lower salary than you intend for longer than you want.
Right.
Whereas if you do have that degree in computer science or game and simulation programming, very useful for engine developers in particular. We have someone from that background. Sorry, we had someone from that background at Jagex working on some machine learning systems that we were going to use to. Well, I can't go into the specifics, but to make the AI opponent of a particular thing better. So you're more likely to find that you can parlay that education into something that will get you hired.
All right, good advice. Yeah, that's good advice. Speaking from personal experience that I've seen, the easiest thing to do to get, once you get your foot in the door, most companies will give you the opportunity to move up, very similar to how they offered Alex the opportunity to become a game designer. So what we're going to do, guys, is we're going to take a quick 60-second break, and when we come back, we're going to go ahead and talk a bit about Alex's voiceover opportunities that he had at Jagex. So I will see you guys in just a second. Hi, my name is Jonathan Weinberger, and I've been developing games with C# and Unity for the last 6 years. I've helped thousands of developers learn to code and improve their skill sets. I currently teach game development on Udemy, an online marketplace for courses. Udemy has over 17 million students learning everything from game development to piano or cooking. Enjoy courses on any device and at your own pace with lifetime access. My course, The Ultimate Guide to Game Development with Unity, is designed to teach you the fundamentals of C# programming in Unity. We'll cover everything from receiving user inputs to creating destructible objects. By the end of this course, you'll make 2 high-quality games you can share with the world. This course is for anyone who wants to learn game development or refine their technique. Whether you're interested in game development as a hobby or you want to make games professionally, this course will grow your programming skill set and help you go on to make your own games and applications. Click on the link in the bottom left of the video player to access a special discount for this course. I look forward to teaching you more about game development with Unity and C# on Udemy.
Sweet.
All right, so we are back, and one thing, there's one question, there's going to be a couple questions related to RuneScape that we want to come back to, but also we want to talk about the new voiceover. So there's a lot of voiceover now in RuneScape, which wasn't there back in the years when I played, which was 2002, 2006, and I think that stuff didn't come into till RS3, which was probably like past, post 2012 era of RuneScape. So how did you become the voice actor for Meltzar, the Mad, and Sigmund?
We needed someone right now. Basically.
You just rose your hand and they're like, let's go.
Yeah, basically.
Nice.
So it started with the release of RS3, specifically, the transition from RS2 to RS3, where there was this desire to voice all of the content in the game. Like, that was the stated objective was every word in the game that someone spoke would be read out. And that was quite quickly toned down to, right, all new content we release, we're going to voice. And we found a very good agency that did the majority of the work for us. Can't remember their name. I'll find it at some point.
Sure.
But we got actors and actresses like David Rintoul and Rebecca Perfect.
Nice.
To voice the various characters that we were adding to new content in the game.
Okay.
Go
ahead.
And so that was for things like the first world event. We got them in, and they voiced probably between them 20,000 words of dialogue.
That is a lot.
For that one update.
Jeez, that is so much.
And then the same for World Event 2, and the same for the large quests that came out around that time. But at the same time, we were also doing upgrades to old content because, that's an ongoing process. Stuff starts to look very clunky. The code that's running behind things becomes outdated as the engine gets better features that let you rewrite things to be a lot more efficient.
Right.
And so in particular, when we went back over Dominion Tower, which is essentially boss rush mode for RuneScape, we wanted voice lines for all of the bosses that you could fight, and that's the Culinaromancer, and that's Melzar the Mad, and that's all of these things. But we didn't have time to go to the agency and get, I think it was 10 different voice actors that we were looking at having to hire for that.
Right.
For this tiny little project at very short notice. And so Mod E&T and Mod Bond just basically said, look, if anyone in-house wants to give it a shot, we'll record you, we'll see what we think, and if it's good enough, we'll stick it in the game. It's only 24 words each, probably.
Right.
So
your
it doesn't
voice
matter.
Is forever. Your voice is forever in RuneScape.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if you're not a professional level of quality like the people that we hired to do these big headline updates. But just give it a go, see what you think. And I'd done some bits and pieces already for World of Warcraft Machinima that a friend of mine made, and that sort of thing. One or two bits and pieces that I just recorded into a microphone setup at home.
Yeah.
And of course, we had a proper recording booth at Jagex, and so I did the lines, and they said, "Yes, that's not terrible. We'll put it in game."
Very cool.
So yeah, I did Melzar the Mad and the Culinaromancer and the guy at the top of the pillar when you do the Taskmaster emote. If you complete all of the achievements in game, you get an emote you can do where you stand on a pillar and go ha.
That is awesome. So a question just came in from our student group, from Tyler. Do you know what the pay is like for voice actors in games when it's outsourced like that? Is it modest, substantial? Anything you know about the depth of a salary?
I know that it's more now than it was a couple of years ago because there was something of an outcry over the amount that they were getting and the conditions that they were working in, which caused a certain amount of overhaul of all that. I've never done any professional voice acting at all. So I've never really been in a position to look at how much you would get paid. I was also not in charge of doing the sourcing for the voice work, so I don't know how much we paid the studio for the people that we were hiring.
Gotcha.
I'm given to understand that if you can make your name a household name, then you can do pretty well. But I suppose not everyone can be Jennifer Hale. Not everyone can be Jim Cummings. The really big names in
that to me, like, what comes to mind is the cast of Overwatch.
Yeah, the cast of Overwatch.
Yeah.
The cast of Overwatch, of course, are benefiting very much from Blizzard's very all-encompassing publicity around Overwatch. So they've got a certain amount of celebrity in their own right, which is not usual for voice actors of games.
Right.
Most of the voice actors in games that are famous in their own right are famous more for the TV and such, the other roles that they've done. So Mark Hamill, for example, absolutely prolific voice actor in a great many games.
Right.
But still, people know him more as either the Joker in Batman the Animated Series or as Luke Skywalker.
Huh. All right, so it really depends. If you can make a name for yourself, you can make a lot of money. If not, then it's still really cool to do. I mean, you get to walk through the RuneScape and hear your voice, and hundreds, potentially millions of other players are going to hear your voice. So voice acting isn't just the only thing you've done for RuneScape. rewinding time to the Halloween event of 2016, you actually have a jingle that you can actually come across in RuneScape even today, just doing like subsequent, or not subsequent, but previous Halloween events that you can unlock it in the game world, right? And it's your jingle, and you're actually singing in this, right?
Yeah, it was sort of. We were quite strapped for time when we made that Halloween event, so.
And I
The
have
event,
the jingle here. Can we play that?
yeah,
All
okay.
right, let's go ahead and play this jingle. It's a 30-second jingle for you guys. The full song, I believe, is like 2.5 minutes. It's the most catchiest song I've ever heard in RuneScape. It's
That's
really awesome.
Mod Bond's audio work was really good.
All right, here it is.
So do come on down to the haunted house where ghostly hordes await you to leap and to ride and perform their cabaret. They'll make sure you never want again. They'll take care of you fondly, and shortly you'll join their grim society.
All right, so that is your very, very catchy jingle. It is truly awesome. I love that. I was listening to it before the stream, like on repeat. It was really good. So my favorite part of this is the ending where you have that evil laugh. Tell me what that was like to be able to record an evil laugh like that. And I mean, how does it feel being able to walk through RuneScape and have that soundtrack trigger?
Uh, I, I've had other people say, evil laugh, yeah, but honestly, I just thought it was a reasonably happy chuckle. Yeah.
So it wasn't
Yeah.
it wasn't intended to be an evil laugh. It was just a chuckle.
No, it was probably channeling a bit of Vincent Price, Thriller.
Gotcha.
But no, it's obviously in order to unlock that track in RuneScape, you have to play a Halloween event, and not everyone's going to go through old event soundtracks and play all of the songs. But we sort of started a precedent. I think the Halloween 2014 was the first song with lyrics, maybe 2015. The one with the Ozzy Osbourne XP, anyway.
Very cool.
But that was the first song that had the technology behind it to actually have proper words. And honestly, between Steve Lord, the head of audio there, and
Right.
Mod Bond, who was the composer of that very, very catchy tune, as you say, they've produced some really incredible stuff over the last couple of years. If you look at the Quest 1 Piercing Note, for example, that was built around the fact that we had the tech now to do really decent audio work in the
Right.
game. And so it features a couple of custom written songs and a number of puzzles that are primarily sound related, although there are ways to complete it as well if you don't have access to sound, because some of our players are deaf. Quite a lot of our players turn the sound off and watch YouTube videos on another screen, because it's a perfectly valid way to play RuneScape.
Right.
So we didn't want to shut them out entirely of completing the puzzles, but if you play it with sound, it's got a certain
I got you. It's kind of
extra
like
cohesion to it.
Very cool.
So yeah, I'm just consistently impressed by Mod Bond and his ability to create these very catchy tunes.
That's awesome.
It's just a shame that so many players won't ever get to hear the Penguins in Space song, because
It never got released.
recorded that for a game jam,
And
and it was a project that wasn't ever released.
That's awesome. No, I love the name of that. So you're no longer with RuneScape. You're with Splash Damage. What is it like now that you've kind of you've parted away from Jagex, and your voice is left behind in that game, and your contributions are in that game that people are still actively playing and using today? I mean, what is accomplishment wise, like, do you feel like you've won the game design? Like you've won at game design, like you have won. You walked away leaving your mark on that insane world.
I mean, obviously, it's very pleasing to have my voice in a game. That's a cool thing. Um, it's sort of easy to keep in perspective though when it's a couple of dozen words and a song track next to just this massive amount of proper professional level stuff that just sounds really, really cool. So I don't think I'm in danger of getting a big head about it anytime soon, but I'm just grateful for the opportunity to do it. Really.
Right. I mean, it's more words than I have in a video game, but also it's, you know, looking at it from, and maybe it's because I'm a fanboy of RuneScape, and I loved old school RuneScape. So, you know, being able to, and where RuneScape is today, it's still one of the largest free-to-play MMOs in the world. You know, so if you're gonna have your voice in one of those MMOs, RuneScape, it would be a top pick. So, very cool. We are almost near the end of the show, so I want to go ahead and just take a few questions here from the AMA. I don't know if you're allowed to talk about this, but one of the questions that came in was, why did you leave RuneScape?
It comes down to, well, there's always a number of factors in moving jobs, and I suspect that any one of them wouldn't have been enough, but I'd been on RuneScape for 8 years. And 8 years is a long time to work on a single project.
Right.
You need to work on different genres. You need to work on different products. You need to work with different companies in order to keep that experience coming in order to make sure you continue to grow professionally.
Right.
So that was a push factor away from RuneScape, because I'd done a lot of different things with Jagex. I'd had a lot of opportunity to work on a range of content, and one of the things that RuneScape is very good at is providing opportunities for developers to work on very different things. Quests are very different from skills.
Right.
But I think by then I'd seen pretty much everything there was to see, at least once. Splash Damage is also located in Bromley, whereas Jagex is up in Cambridge.
Right.
And I was born down the road from Bromley in Beckenham, and my parents still live in Beckenham and Chislehurst.
Okay, very cool.
And I've got 18-month-old twins, which is a certain amount of work. And having their grandparents handy to occasionally take them off our hands and go down the soft play while my wife and I spend some time being a couple rather than a pair of parents is a benefit. Also, Splash Damage offered me more money, which, let's be honest, the remuneration is no small part of why anyone does a job.
Right.
So, you know, it's those three things taken together really that prompted me to accept, to interview and then to accept the offer when it came along. Like I say, any one of those on its own would probably not have been enough.
I gotcha. So it was just more so I'm sure you don't regret any of your time at Jagex. I mean, you've had a 8-year run there. I mean, that's, from a stability standpoint, that's amazing in the game industry, and it's just for your professional growth, which is awesome. So we definitely wish you the best of luck there. A question came in about job stability. You know, in terms of a traditional, a store box game, job stability could potentially be 6 to 8 months, and then you go to the next company. How does job stability differ when you're working on an MMO like RuneScape? I mean, it seems like, because they're a subscription model, right? So it seems like the income is bottomless.
It's not so much the revenue model that the company is using. It's the size of the company. It's how well established it is.
Right.
RuneScape makes enough money as a product, and Jagex is large enough as a company that if things took a downturn tomorrow, then no one would be out of a job immediately.
I got you. You guys have
because
plenty
the company
of room,
is
right?
Yeah, the company is big enough that it would be capable of absorbing some hard times. Whereas if you work for a little indie company that relies on its last release to have the money to pay all of its workers to make the next release,
right,
then that job security is a lot more tenuous. That's basically the difference. If the company you work at can eat a bad release and not die as a company,
Right.
then you have job security.
That's an excellent way to define that.
You know that I wouldn't suggest that anyone join a huge company and then complain if they get downsized because a product does badly and they were the most recent hire, because if they do downsize and need to cut costs, then the new hire would be the first to go.
Right.
But it's more likely that you would keep your job in the event of some lean times working for a bigger and more established company. The flip side of that is a smaller company, and a company that is taking more of those sort of initial risks in order to establish themselves probably has more interesting work, perhaps. Certainly potentially has more ways for you to leave your mark professionally on the company and the games it's making than one that's well established, one that's very set in its production processes.
Right. Very cool. Just gonna go ahead and scroll through the YouTube chat if trolls have finished. Let me see here. And if there's any last questions in the AMA. Okay, it looks like my students are in the chat kind of helping out some of the other people in chat. All right, so I think that's going to wrap it up. That is 60 minutes. So Alex, thank you again for coming on and sharing your experience working on RuneScape and what you're doing now at Splash Damage. Like I said before, everyone wishes you the best of luck. 8 years with one company is nothing shy of an accomplishment. I mean, especially in the game industry, with the stigma of every 6 to 8 months, you kind of, especially here in the States, you just walk across the street to the next one. So we look forward to seeing whatever you're gonna come up with as a monetization designer. And and like I said, thank you so much for coming on the show. If anyone has any last minute questions, or if you have any last words, we will go ahead and dip out.
Awesome. I'll hang around in the chat for a while.
All right, good deal. And for those watching, if you're interested in learning game development, you can find links to sign up to learn Unity and make your own indie games. If you're interested in learning more about Alex Fry, his LinkedIn and his Wikipedia page as Mod Moltaire are in the description, so go ahead and check those out. Also, next week we have Fatality, the first ever esports professional lifestyle, on the show next week. So I will see you guys next week. Bye.
Cheers, guys.